Hi, my name is Harsh, and I work with Stamp for my MBA applications this year, and I have secured ed from INSEAD for the MBA class of 2022.
Harsh, thank you very, very much for joining us today to talk about your application process. Can you start off by giving the viewers a little bit of background about you, industries you're in, your GMAT score, and I suppose why you were looking to transition, why you were looking to do an MBA?
Okay, sure. So I have total 8 years of experience. I am originally from India, and I mostly work in tech consulting in the supply chain domain. And I have worked in many countries. I worked in UK, I worked and lived in Italy, and my current role is basically an account manager where I work with the clients and I advise them on the latest supply chain technologies and we implement. The reason for doing an MBA was I was looking to transition into healthcare or health tech, and though I was able to take up a couple of clients in Europe, but I wanted to move out of supply chain and a restricted domain towards entirely either in a product management or strategy role and have this holistic understanding of the business. And MBA seemed like a very good place to be for 1 year to experiment and to learn new skills and then accelerate the career.
Excellent. And so you applied to European schools.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that decision and why Europe, why not the US, and what was in your head at the time?
Right. So I spent close to six and a half years in Europe. So that was one thing. It's a second home now. So that was one of the reasons. Second, most of the US MBAs were 2 years, and I was not in I'm not in a position to leave the workplace for 2 years. I wanted to be back into the workforce as soon as possible, and that was the two biggest reason. And the third is more on a personal side. I wanted to be close to my parents, just a flight away, not a lot of time difference. And the clock is adjusted. So since I've been living for 6 years, the clock is adjusted with them. So that was another big reason I wanted to be just in Europe, focus on Europe.
Okay, so can you talk us through the application process itself? Because yours was quite a drawn out process. Yeah. And so can you talk about the schools that you chose to apply to, like how long the whole process took, and just walk us through that timeline, please?
So for me, it was a very, very, I think, a particular case. I started thinking about MBA in 2019 beginning, and I was through my GMAT by end of 2019. And I started applying to the schools in 2020 cycle. So that time or that year, I worked with someone else.
A different consultant.
A different consultant, yes.
Okay.
That was not a very good choice from my side. I did speak with a lot of people and decided to go with this particular person. The problem was the method of working. It was a very I would say I would put it as dogmatism, because it was not a two-way lane. I used to get a draft of the essays that were sort of like cookie cutter method. This is what you have to write here. This is what you have to write here. So I used to get these predefined essays for the school, and you have to fill in your own story. I did not click very well. So in that, anyway, in the process, I was too late. While choosing the consultant and going for the school. So I applied to only 1 or 2 schools in 2020, and of course got rejections from both, I think 3 schools. So I got rejections from them. Then last year, I again spoke to a couple of people, and the way we spoke in our first meeting, I felt like this is going to be a two-way lane. I felt like my stories are not going to be put in a frame, but we will be talking and we will be picking what needs to be put where. So it was important for me that if I'm telling my story, I need your guidance, but I also need the independence of writing my own stories, how I want to present it. So I think that's how, and that was the biggest reason. The first meeting, I got that feeling, and it continued towards the end. Like for first few sessions, we spent only on outlining everything from the where I was born to schooling and to what I want to do, how's the work. So all those things pretty helped me a lot, because when you start telling your stories from the beginning, you yourself know what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, and then I had you to point them out, and we started writing those stories. So last year we applied to 3 schools, LBS, Cambridge, and INSEAD. LBS, I got a reject, and I rejected without interview, and the other 2 schools we have an admit. So that's the whole story. So I would put it in at least 3 years. This whole journey been on my mind, from GMAT, from starting to take the GMAT till the admit.
Right. So you applied to 3 schools and you got
Yeah.
offers from Cambridge and INSEAD.
INSEAD, yes.
Which 2 out of 3 is a pretty good hit rate.
Pretty good
most
hit rate,
people
yes.
would be very, very happy with that.
Yes,
So,
I am too.
so let's talk a little bit about what you thought stood out about your application. What do you think were some of the strengths and the weaknesses in your profile, and how do you think working together helped through the interviews, through the essays, through Kira Talent? What do you think you gained from working with a consultant?
I think so. I come from a very very unique background. Even for I would say overrepresented male, Indian male IT pool. My background is very different. And then all the stories, all these years that I've been living across different continents, and I had a lot of stories. And there is always a place in a question you can put multiple stories. I think the best part about essay writing and with you was the initial sessions that we did, and you had this one whole document, like a snapshot of my entire life, and we were able to present a singular message out to that comp in every essay, from what are we writing in the main essays to the short essays. INSEAD is it's a pretty lengthy process, 7 essays, but the best part was we were able to pick the stories from all of them that points to a singular direction, that tells what exactly I want to do. And I don't think so it's possible without you hearing me out first, without you making the snapshot that you did of the couple of first few sessions that we had. I don't think so it would have been possible, because I have multiple stories, but I relied on you to be the best judge which story should we write. So that was the essay writing part. And about of course the Kira Talent, that was a funny story if you remember. So I was on the last day our application for INSEAD, November 2nd, and it was already 10 p.m. The 12 was the deadline. I submitted my essays thinking I'll get 48 hours to do the Kira Talent, which wasn't the case. Of course, I got an email saying that you have to finish it within the deadline. So I had 2 hours and no preparation. And that's when I called you and you were like, why do you leave everything to the last minute? You remember well. You had to cancel a session you had, and you helped me with the Kira Talent. And I mean, again, the same story. There is a question put to you. You can answer it in a very succinct and an impactful manner, or you can blabber. I was blabbering. I had story. I could tell it in a minute, but I had no structure. And that's where you told me about the star format. We did around 16 questions in 1 hour. And after your call, I just quickly logged on and I finished those four or 5 essay questions that there were. So that's what was the best, because I an hour ago I had no structure, and after an hour I knew what I have to answer, how I have to answer, and you told me to write down all the stories in the star format. That's what we did in that 1 hour, apart from practicing. And same goes for interviews. As always, you told me to book the interviews and I left it to the last minute. It was weekend. Again, thanks to you, you were pretty accommodative. I mean, I know you had meetings that day as well, which you canceled. So yeah, that same. So for essays, for the interviews, you prepared me well. luckily, at least for INSEAD and Cambridge both, the interviews were not very typical like we see in US schools. For INSEAD, I had both Italians as my interviewers because my work location and living country was Italy. And they went pretty smooth. No typical why MBA, why INSEAD questions for me. It was straightforward discussion. With one interviewer, he worked or still works next to my company in Italy, in Florence. So it's my office, then there is a cafe, and then there is his office. So we connected very well on the traffic situation around the office, and the whole discussion was over there. It was pretty well. And with the other interviewer she had a friend who was from INSEAD as well, sitting next to her. And she had received an offer from the firm that I had mentioned in my application, that I want to work there as a health tech. So she gave me her contact number in my interview while it was happening in office. The other person came in, she said hi. So, and they both told me, as in both the interviews told me they're going to recommend. So it went pretty well. But yes, I think I went into interviews very confident by your approach, which we had once we had the mock interview, to write down in a single line or in pointers. If they ask you the why INSEAD, what are the 7 points or 6 points we're going to talk about? So I have still that document with me, or one page with me, because there are a couple of questions that are going to come handy. What are your weaknesses or strengths? We did those questions and we talked about it again. From there, we went back to the snapshot to find out the weaknesses, to find out the strengths. We again went back to the snapshot, like the storytelling thing that you always tell me I'm good with them. So we brought them as a strength. That document, I still have it for future interviews whenever that happens. So I didn't need them, but it was very useful. So that's how the whole process was.
Brilliant. And can you talk about how the big decisions you had to make along the route? So one of the reasons why an MBA application process is so unnerving is because it's a process. It's not just one thing, it's a process. And there's a few decisions you have to make along the way. Yeah. Do I stop the GMAT now, or do I continue? At what point did you decide, right, enough's enough on the GMAT? What about choosing your recommenders? How did you go about the process of choosing your recommenders? There's a few big decisions you had to make along the way. Right. Can you talk about your decision-making process?
Definitely. So one thing that I think that happens a lot, that people do believe, even if they are really good in their mocks, the GMAT mock or GRE mocks. So I did have my GMAT in 2019. But after 2020 fiasco, getting rejections, and that was a big decision for me to stop and not apply to any more schools. I applied to 2 schools in 2020 with my old consultant, and I was not happy, but I didn't know the process. I was not, it was for first time for me. And even though I was not happy with what's happening, I had to believe, because this person been doing it for so long, maybe I was wrong. So I waited for the decision. I was rejected. And that's when I asked to stop. Even though I had some essays written for other schools, I did not apply to them, because I believe that was one of the big decisions I had to make, to stop applying to schools in 2020 with the old consultant, because it wasn't working out. Second is I then in 2020, before I started in 2021, before I started working with you, I had to make a shift from GMAT to GRE, because my GMAT was 690. I had to, I think I appeared 1 off center and 2 online exams, and in all 3 I scored 690. So for me, GMAT, probably the format wasn't working well. So I knew I had to probably shift to GRE and give it a try, which I did. But I made sure that before we get on to work together, I finished my GRE. So I finished my GRE well before we started working together. And I scored well, 331, which was a decent score. So that's one thing. From the recommenders point of view, so try not to mix your exams with your essays. It's a very important thing. For exams, you may be really good at it, but till you're not done with the exams, you have this uncertainty in your head, and you're gonna keep thinking about it, because if in an hour after a work, of course you must be working. So after work hours, you only have 4 to 5 hours. Now you can spend 2.5 of them on GMAT, GRE, and rest 2.5 for the essays. But it doesn't work. It's not a switch. After studying for 2 hours, you don't have that much of patience to actually think about your stories. So the best part would be finish your GMAT, GREs. There is 5-year validity, which is, I think, why it is there. And then once you're done with that, then you move on to your essays. From the recommenders point of view, I think one of my recommender was discarded by you because it was a client. And you said we need to have the people from the company. And we had this discussion for a very long period. But good thing with me was I had people who would be willing to spend time and write the recommendations. So as what we did, we had this questionnaire of course, there are multiple formats of how school asks you the about questions about from your recommendators or recommenders, but the question more or less are same. So we had this list of questions and 2 or 3 recommenders to start writing. And then we, of course, perfected the writing. We had something to do with it. So the grammars or how the profile is coming out, but we did give them enough time to start writing by giving them a generic set of questions. And then we changed the question wording or the answer wording whenever it was needed. So that was important bit. I mean, you have to understand, I am a person who leaves things to the last minute, but if my recommenders have 1 day to write a full 2-pager, I don't think so. Nobody can do that. So that was one good advice you gave me to start working on your application and finish on the deadline. I don't care, but have your recommenders write for you now as soon as possible. So I think that was important. Choosing recommenders, again, I mean, the best advice is your bosses, somebody you directly report to. It might be tricky, but the best part with that is these feedbacks that we get at workplace about your strengths and your weaknesses may not be that frequent, but your bosses know you very well. And sometimes your strengths and weaknesses that you don't think of, they know it. And when they start writing about it, it's a good thing to know. And I think it was very important for us to understand. So there, for example, you don't want to go saying I am a really good people person and your boss writing that you are an introvert. So that's where the conflict is. This simply means you don't know yourself or your boss doesn't know you. In both cases, it's a bad news. So that was very important. So I think that was for the recommenders. Give them enough time. Point out the things that you have done in the past, because maybe they don't remember well, maybe they do, but tell them these are the strengths you're trying to highlight to the school, and give them examples of how you have demonstrated that, and ask them to write about it. So I mean, that's a good thing. And don't write your own recommendations. I think a lot of people do that, but schools have a way to, I think you told me that they use something, they have a way to know the writing styles that you had written. It's the same person who written both of these. So don't do that. Have your writing, have somebody else write it. I mean, your boss write it. Don't write it yourself. So those
Absolutely.
are the things on that.
So there's a lot of people going to be watching this who will be in that very, very oversubscribed demographic category, which you fit into, which is, as you touched on earlier, the Indian male IT background. It's a very, very competitive profile. Yeah. So for you, as somebody who got 2 offers from some of the top business schools in the world, in coming from that background, what do you think was different about your application, about your profile, about you as an applicant, that made you stand out, that made you get those 2 offers when so many Indian male engineers really, really struggle through this process?
That's difficult to answer. It's very difficult to answer. I'll put I'll try to think and answer it. I think the could be one of the biggest contributor could be my international experience. So out of 8, I spent 6.5 working in three, living in 3 different countries, Singapore, UK, and then Italy. And then uh, I think that is something that also comes into your writing as well. I feel that there are some questions, for example, for what's your international experience or your international motivation, questions like these. I think somebody who has uh, lived like this would be able to answer it fairly in a very honest manner. Then again, I understand people from my demographic might not have a lot of international experience, but then I think the reality is both INSEAD and LBS, at least they look for people who can actually adjust to the international environment. The programs are rigorous and they would probably want somebody with a global perspective rather than a singular mindset. I think that was one of the aspect. Second, I think the interview part, you helped a lot, but I think I was a bit okay for the interviews because I have this, because in tech consulting, you're doing this a lot of time. You're in video calls with people and you're talking nonsense. So that's what I did my interviews as well. But I think the essay part is important because um, again, I'll point to the same point, a single message from the main essay to every part where we're going, even in the hobbies, how we related, how we picked from list of 5 hobbies that I have, how we picked 3 that actually makes me very aligned with my long-term and short-term goal. Uh, I think that point that even I think in my Cambridge interview, the professor even said this, that I've read your application and it does feel like a human. But thank you for writing so honestly about everything. I think that's what is important. No jargons, honesty. And if you remember in one of my essays about long-term goal, we had written a line. In fact, you added that line that this is my long-term goal, and then full stop, and then it said that's what I would do after MBA. Full stop. The 6 words in one line. That's what I would do. Now, it may look like a waste of space, but think about it. That's what I would do. It's like my essays are talking to that comp, right? It's like me sitting there and telling them in a very simple language where I come from, where I want to go, and here you are, and that's how I will go there. So I think that's very important to have this streamlined essays that all point to the same direction and not going like in 10 multiple different directions. So those are the 2 points. I think spend time on your essays, and of course uh, on the third point, I think uh, I don't think so GMAT or GRE scores, they're important, but I don't think so they make a lot of difference. Because for Cambridge, if you remember, we sent the GRE score later on, but it was still fine. So I think it's okay for
So
the scores point.
what you're saying is the score, it needs to be over a certain threshold, but beyond that, what's more important is your character, your international experience, your research into the school, and the way that you put together your essays. Absolutely. Exactly. Could not agree more. Okay, so now the big question. You have INSEAD and Cambridge on the plate. Which one are you going to choose? Or what is your maybe not what are you going to choose, but what is your thought process at the moment between these 2 schools? What, based on all the research you've done, can you objectively describe these 2 schools and what's going on in your head?
Okay, so I think it's a so I'm going to leave the rankings out of it. I don't believe in them. I don't think so anyone should be making a choice based on the ranking. I think from my perspective and where I want to go, uh, I'm thinking, all right. So now my research is away from the school and into a specific industry, right? So where I want to go. So I'm talking to alumni of both schools and trying to understand which school do they think will help me more. And it's not the curriculum is same, the length of both courses is same. So one thing is, how is the industry connect of the school of your or my in this case my target industry? How is the connect? Both schools are famous for one thing or other. Both are great schools, but I'm now researching on which one connects me better with my industry. Second thing I think for me is, of course, I have lived in UK, I lived in Italy, mainland Europe, let's call it, and I know the language could be an issue. So even if you learn the basic communication, you will never feel a lot of integrated if you don't, if you're in Europe mainland. It's a beautiful place to be, but is it a beautiful place to build your career? You have to decide for your own. So I'm now also thinking that way, whether UK, because as I said, I lived in UK, I was good time.
Yeah.
I connected well. So for me, it's now depends on these two parameters, that of which location, which geography I actually want to target. It's not Europe. People, a lot of people know this, but if people don't know, UK is UK, Europe mainland is Europe mainland when it comes to language and the opportunities when it comes along with it. And then second is my target industry. So both schools, which of them is well connected? And then yes,
Yeah.
the more you talk to people, it's always a confusing decision. So I'm still making that choice. So let's see.
Oh, it's a fantastic decision that you have to make.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely,
Thank you.
absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Right, Harsh, thank you so much for your time. Really, really lovely to hear your thoughts and hear where your head's at. And I think inspiring for a lot of people who are watching, thinking, I could never get to admits to such amazing schools, especially with my background, or maybe as an Indian male. There's a lot of factors in here that I think people have found really valuable in hearing your experience. So thank you very much for opening up. One final thing, if I may, as is becoming tradition on these videos, can I get a high five?
High five.
Yes. Harsh, thanks ever so much, and best of luck with the decision-making process. I can't wait to hear how you get on.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you so much for all the help. I mean, couldn't have done it without you, goes without saying, but the way you go above and beyond, adjusting to your calendars and your holidays, depending on my urgencies that you did. Thank you so much. Thank you.
It was my pleasure. It really was. I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
Cheers.